Hello everybody, welcome back to Mondays with Mover. I'm Mover, and today we've got a special guest, Rick Abell, who is, or was, a chief engineer for the Air Force, technical director for some programs you may have heard of, the YF-22, YF-23, C-17, and a whole bunch of other things that we're going to talk about. So without further ado, let's start. Rick, thank you for joining us on the channel. How are you?
Just peachy keen.
Rick, tell me about yourself. I mean, you've done a whole bunch of cool things. How did you get into aviation in general? Did you start out as a kid loving airplanes, or were you an engineer first?
Believe it or not, I was born the day after Pearl Harbor, which
Holy
tells
crap.
you how old I am.
Wow.
And the first picture I remember my mom showing me, I was making a cardboard airplane out of a Quaker Oats box, believe it or not.
That's awesome.
It was a Navy Hellcat.
Oh, cool.
And always was interested in airplanes. And I always wanted to be a fighter pilot, like most of the people that you talk to on these programs. But about in the middle of high school, my eyes went bad, and I'd be lucky to be able to see the dashboard. So if I couldn't get into the Air Force as a pilot, I figured I could go into engineering and help make the bloody thing, so that I had that attached to the community of aviation.
Yeah.
So after I got out of high school, I went to University of Cincinnati and got my degree in mechanical engineering. And when I graduated, I had lots of job offers. I wasn't a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but they were looking for engineers, one of them which was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I interviewed with those folks, and I found out that that's where the Air Force manages the development of all their airplanes.
Yeah.
Be they fighters, cargo, helicopters, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got hired in there, and I really found out it was a wonderful job because they had offered me a salary of $67.70 a year. This was in 1964, which was basically $6,770 annum, which I found out later was 3 times the price they were paying to first lieutenants and second lieutenants.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But before I went to work, I got a $500 raise. And I said, well, hell, this can't be all bad.
That's awesome.
So I showed up at Wright-Patterson and I interviewed different departments, airframes, engines, avionics, what have you. And I wound up in the engine business. And they sent me to this office, and I walked in the door, and I noticed that just about everybody there was of World War II vintage, except a couple other guys who were my age. And I said, well, let's see, I got a $500 raise before I started to work. Everybody here is about 30 years older than me, so this can't be all bad because I can get ahead.
Yeah. Just wait them out.
So my first few jobs were on helicopters, believe it or not.
Well, okay.
And I soon learned that I didn't really want to be involved with helicopters.
Okay.
There was actually a test wing at the base. And because I worked on the engines for a CH-3C, which was the Jolly Green used in Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
they were doing tests there. And they said, you want to come along in a couple tests? And I said, fantastic. So we're flying along, and I'm up in the left seat, which is the co-pilot seat in a helicopter. He said, you want to fly? And I said, let's see, we got the cyclic, we got the collective, we got the twist grip, we got the rudder pedals. Okay, great, let's try it. After about 5 minutes, I said, you got the airplane.
Nope.
And that's all I needed to know about flying helicopters. And more power to you that you can do that.
That's awesome.
I was in the office one day, and my boss came over and says, you've ever heard of the F-111? I said, yeah. It was known as the controversial TFX.
Okay.
Because there was a big hoorah about when it was selected. And they said, you need your help down there. And I says, okay, where is it? He says, it's in the basement of this building down the hill, and you go down there and blah, 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 blah. It took me 3 freaking days to find the office. Because the complex down at the bottom of the hill, we were up on top of the hill at the base, was an old World War II aircraft factory and had a lot of underground tunnels. And my office was down in one of the basements in some of these tunnels.
Yeah.
And I wandered around. I went back up the next day and I said, my boss says, what the hell are you doing here? I said, well, I couldn't find it. And he said, what do you mean you couldn't find it? Where is it? He says, basement 16B. I said, okay, fine. Next day I trundled down there and got lost again. Came back up the hill. Next day he said, what the hell is wrong with you? So I finally called up the office. I said, is there another way to get there besides the way I've been going? They told me and I found the place.
Uh-huh.
So they had formed a team of people to look at why the engine kept quitting on the F-111. And I got signed to that. And I was basically a structural kind of guy, when things break and blow up and don't work right and what have you. And another guy called me up and he says, come upstairs, I want to talk to you. I said, okay. So I go upstairs and say, what do you know about engine stalls? And as you know what an engine stall is, you probably experienced them. And I said, well, all I really know is that the engine goes bang, fire comes out the front, and it's not good. He said, well, okay, what else do you know? I said, nothing. He said, here, read this book. I said, okay. So it was a publication put out by NASA. I read the book, and I started to learn what really happens when you have an engine stall, which was important to know. And about a month later, he called me back upstairs. He'll give you a little quiz. So what do you know about this? And I said, well, you got a compressor map, and then when it exceeds the operating line, the airfoil stall, blah, blah, blah. Get a lot of hum on the aerodynamics. He said, that's great. We're going to send you to Pratt & Whitney. I said, did I fail? He said, no, you're doing good. We'll send you to Pratt & Whitney. You work at Pratt & Whitney and work on this problem. I said, super. So I packed up my wife and myself, and we moved to Hartford for about 6 months, where I worked with Pratt on figuring out why the TF-30 was causing all these problems. And it turned out that it was twofold. It was the first afterburning turbofan that existed in the country.
Oh, wow.
And when you light the afterburners, you get a kick in the pants.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a big pressure pulse out the back of the airplane. Well, in the TF-30, the back of the engine is connected to the front of the engine in a different way than a typical turbojet engine is. And it would basically back pressure the fan and cause a stall, and the fire go out the front, go bang, and it's not good.
Yeah, yeah.
So we had to do a lot of work on working the controls and making sure that we could light the afterburner softly without having kind of problem. They said, well, you did good, kid. Great. I said, okay, fine. So my next job in the 111 was getting an engine developed and qualified that had enough oomph to make the thrust away to the 111 what it should have been.
Yeah, more power.
Because the original TF-30 produced the thrust it was supposed to, but the F-111 was so freaking overweight that it was a real dog as far as maneuverability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we went through about, P3, P9, P7, P12, P100, about 5 different variants of the TF-30 till we finally got one that was a TF-30 P100 that had went in the F-111F, and it had this thrust to weight ratio that the airplane should have had when it first went into service.
Wow.
And if you asked any F-111 pilot if they've flown the various models, which one they like the best, the F model by a wide margin is the best because it flew like a fighter.
Yeah.
Even though it was really an attack airplane.
Yeah.
It was a real attack airplane. So I did that for a while, and then they sent me off to grad school. And I got my master's degree and half of my doctorate. And then I went back to work while I was going to do my dissertation, so you get the honest to God PhD thingy. But life became more interesting because I got to work on other things.
Yeah,
and so I never finished it. So I always say I have 2.5 degrees.
Well, that's a 1.5 more than I have. Continue.
So anyway, I come back to work, and the next job I got was the J85 engine. It was in the F5, was the -21 version. And that one was probably, to this day, the best thrust-to-weight engine ever built, because it's an extremely powerful engine for that size of airplane.
Yeah.
And it was going in the F5. It didn't go into T-38. That was earlier versions. And they started having compressor blades flinging off of it.
Oof.
So my boss called me up one day and said, get your butt up to Lynn, Massachusetts to work with GE. So I said, okay, I'm doing. So little Rick runs up to General Electric Lynn. And before I know it, within 2 weeks, the chief scientist of the Air Force, the chief scientist of the propulsion laboratory at Wright-Patterson, a whole bunch of other experts are coming in and saying to me, what the hell's going on? And I said, I don't know, I just got here.
I'm new here. Don't look at me.
I said, I think what's happening is there's some kind of manufacturing defect, but I've been trying to field calls, get you guys rooms, et cetera, et cetera. So we finally had this big come to Jesus meeting with the president of General Electric Aircraft Engines, Gerhard Newman, who was he actually worked for the Flying Tigers as a mechanic.
Wow.
And rose through the ranks of General Electric to become the president of their aircraft engine company.
Wow.
Great guy. So we're in this meeting, and one of his experts gets up on the stage and starts giving him the arm wave and the pointers and the like, and all this good guy, and everybody's sitting around. What the hell's going on? So the chief scientist of the Air Force, I'm sitting in the back with a couple other guys I work with, and he says, I'm sure it's all very interesting, but what the hell does it mean?
Yeah.
And Gerhard Newman, president of the company, says, yes, tells the man what this means. And the guy up on the briefing stage gets a couple more view graphs off and exits stage left. And everybody's going, what is this all? I'm sitting back there. So this is the way the big guys do it, huh?
Wow.
So Gerhard explains what's happening, and it took about, a year and a half before they finally fixed the engine and got that thing going. So after that, I got on the TF-41, which is the Air Force version of the A-7 airplane engine. Navy used TF-30, non-afterburning. The Air Force used the TF-41, which was a derivative of a Rolls-Royce engine. And we were having trouble with that Hummer. So again, my boss calls me up. He says, you ever work with Rolls-Royce? I said, no. They make automobiles. He said, no. He says, go to England. I went, okay. So I got sent to work. I got sent to work at Rolls-Royce for about 6 months. And we finally figured out what that was happening. And that basically was that if you've ever owned a British sports car, when they run, they're fantastic.
When they run.
But they don't run very well. And anytime you try and fix it, it's very detailed and it's very and that's the way they built the airplane engine. It was all basically kind of hand built. It wasn't built for mass production.
Yeah.
And when Allison took over the design of it, they carried that kind of concept over to the Allison engine, which is where it was actually produced. And so when it went to our overhaul shops, after being more or less hand built, they expected it to go together with interchangeable parts and what have you. Well, it didn't very well. And that basically was the problem. We had to redo it to make sure that it was more rugged when you went through overhaul cycles. And that took me, a couple years worth of that good stuff.
In England.
You spent
a couple years there?
No, I spent 6 months at Rolls and 6 months at Allison, and then another year back at the base trying to manage the whole mess.
Gotcha.
And we got it all fixed up, and pretty soon the TF-41 and the A-7D was doing okay again.
Wow.
And apparently I had done good enough on all these other things. They sent me the F-15 program as the chief of the engine department in the F-15 SPO.
No kidding.
And the F-100 engine is a thoroughbred. It was wound tighter than a drum. And if it went a little bad, it would go awful bad. But when it stayed good, it was fantastic. I mean, it was a great engine, but it was a little temperamental. And a lot of, I keep talking about these problems we have. Well, basically, that was my job, apparently, is go fix that crap.
Yeah.
And I was there probably about 4 years, I guess it was. And we had things like stall stagnation where the engine basically melted.
Oh, okay.
We had things like titanium fires where the compressor would catch on fire and you couldn't put it out.
Oh, crap. And now, is this at the beginning of the program, or is
this was probably after it was in production for about a year and a half?
Okay.
Because when you get it through the development cycle and you start feeling anything, you learn things that you never learned in the development program because fighter pilots do things differently. Mechanics been treated differently. You go through different scenarios, and there's things that it wasn't exposed to in the development program that you have to work out.
Yeah.
And it was an exciting time, to say the least. One of my more interesting experiences was, I don't know whether you're familiar with an M37 stand, where you run the engine on the ground in a big frame and testing, you go put it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the M37 stand down at St. Louis, where they were making the F-15s, they would trim the engines and get everything ready to go before they put it in the airplane. Well, they had this one they put on the test stand, and we got this report that says, we heard a loud buzzing noise and the engine exploded.
Oh.
What did you say?
Uh-oh.
And this, you won't believe this. The turbine came apart. The turbine wheel flew out of the engine, went about 600 yards down the flight line, through the roof of a building in St. Louis, McDonnell Douglas Corporation's building, hit a guy's desk, bounced off the desk, fell on the floor, and set the floor on fire.
Holy crap.
That's a true story.
Was this at night? Story. Did they do all the engine tests at
daytime.
Daytime?
No, it's daytime.
Holy crap. Daytime.
It goes, woo, 600 yards down the flight line. I don't know how far up in the air. One of my guys did a calculation. I can't remember the name. It was way the hell, we're airborne. And the funniest part about it was the guy's desk that it hit was the engine guy for McDonnell Douglas, who was always giving Pratt & Whitney a bunch of crap about their engine.
That's awesome.
I called him up and I said, Eschweiler, if you don't stop giving us crap, we're going to get you the next time.
That's a warning. Yeah. Wow.
But I got called about it, and this was on Easter weekend. So I went down to Pratt & Whitney on Easter Sunday where they had the engine. They had shipped it down there. And the thing was sitting on a trailer on the mounts. And in the middle, there was a 2x6 that run across the rails. And you could see the shaft of between the turbine and the compressor. And they had to cut a little notch, and they put that board in there to keep the engine from falling down in the trailer.
Wow.
I mean, it was one of the most interesting things I ever dealt with.
Wow.
So I did that for a while.
That's awesome.
I will also make an observation about the help that pilots give us sometimes in engineering. And I said, no, I'm not being sarcastic about it, but I was responsible for helping put the F-16 engine in, the F-100, okay? And the pilot who ran the F-16 SPO said the engine has to have a backup control because it's a single engine airplane. And I said, why is that? He said, well, all single engine airplanes have backup controls. And I said, well, why do they have that? Well, they do. Okay.
Because?
and because controls are bad. And I said, well, sir, the F-100 control, when it gets bad, it sort of gets sick. It doesn't die. It just doesn't work exactly right, but you can get home and you get a lot of power out of it. It's not a big deal. Now, what we really need is a backup fuel pump. And the reason we need this backup fuel pump is when it gets a little bit of debris that's bigger than a pinhead, the vanes in the fuel pump shatter and you get no fuel flow.
That's bad. Yep.
And that is a bad situation. So we really should have a backup control. I mean, not a backup control. We should have a backup fuel pump. You're not listening to me, kid. We need a backup control. I said, all right, sir. But in the meantime, it'd be okay if we work on a backup fuel pump. He said, okay, good. All right, fine. And that took. Now, the sad part about it is the very first F-16 we lost was because the backup control failed and shut the engine down, and the airplane went into the Gulf of Mexico.
Holy crap.
Now, I didn't say anything about it. I just said, well, we need to fix that part, and we'll fix that. And
so the backup control, did the primary fail? The backup control?
No, the primary was doing fine. The backup control thought it failed and took over, and then it failed.
Oh, so wow.
And pilot was saved, no problem.
Wow.
But we find you're not going to believe these things. But the reason the fuel pump would fail is there's a test that it has to run to be qualified, where it has to eat this mil-spec Arizona road dust, which is a standard micron size and all kinds of distributions and blah, blah, blah. And you run this in through the fuel system, and it has to last X numbers of hours without failing, which it did, because it would grind things up these little particles, except it was made out of a ceramic material, which is very brittle. So it would grind up all this fine stuff, but if a little piece of safety wire or something like that got in the system, it'd go, and the vanes would stop, and it wouldn't pump anymore, and the engine would quit, and it would not be a good thing, which was okay for the F-15. I got two. It wasn't so good for the F-16.
True.
And just to give you some sense of how things work in the government, the reason it had to eat this dust was back in the Korean War, 1950s.
Yeah.
They would use these open trenches to put fuel in, lined with a rubber bladder, because they didn't have tanks.
And
it would get dirt in it. So they had a mil-spec that says, you got to eat this dirt because that's the way it was in Korea. And I found this out and figured, how the hell do we get into this mess? So a lot of that kind of stuff goes on. I got to be sort of a pain in the butt with the system. I said, why are we doing this? Well, it's in the mil-spec. And I said, well, yeah, but why is it in the mil-spec?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know. And I said, well, then I ain't going to do it unless you can explain to me why it's there.
Yeah.
And half the time they couldn't explain it to me, so I didn't do it. And I got away with it, apparently.
So if you're working on the F-16, were you involved with the YF-17, like that, with that program?
I was indeed.
Okay, how did that?
Indeed. I was helping the guys on the YJ-101, which then became the F-404.
Okay.
The YF-17 had the YJ-101, which we, how shall I say, exploited some technology we discovered someplace.
Okay, yeah.
And we built what we called a leaky turbojet. It was a very low bypass turbo fan. And that's what was in the YF-17 when they had the competition between that and the YF-16. So I was on the other side of the fence with that engine. And that's another story that relates to what's going to happen in the F-22, 23 program. Northrop was the lead designer on that, and they partnered with McDonnell Douglas. And Northrop was the lead, and McDonnell Douglas was a sub. Well, when the YF-17 lost the competition, the Navy didn't want a single engine fighter on their boat. And I don't blame them. I've flown on the boat, and it's, good to have two motors.
Yeah. Oh, imagine that.
And so they said, well, we got to have more range, and you get more range in a turbofan than you do in a turbojet. So they developed the F-404 from the YJ-101.
Oh, wow.
And so McDonnell Douglas told Northrop, he says, you guys don't know anything about Navy airplanes, and we know a lot about them. We've built a lot of them, the Banshee, the Phantom II, and we're in good cahoots with the Navy, so we're going to be in charge. And Northrop thought, the hell you say?
Sir?
So there was a great tussle between Northrop and McDonnell Douglas as to who's going to have the football. And McDonnell Douglas worked the Navy to say, Northrop kind of behind the scenes says, you guys don't know anything about Navy airplanes. McDonnell Douglas does, and we would rather have them in charge. We can't tell you that. Mm-hmm. But if you're not hearing me, you probably ought to tune in your radio set a little better.
Yeah.
And so that's when McDonnell Douglas took over and made the F-18 out of the F-17. That's where it came from.
That's awesome.
So I went there, and then all of a sudden I got a call from somebody else and says, you need to go to school again. I said, okay, fine. So they sent me off to Stanford to the business school, and I learned about management, which basically said, whatever you get away with. And it took 1.5 years of that to learn that.
All right. Okay.
And I came back from there. I then risen in the ranks, so to speak, and I'll tell you about it in terms of military ranks. It's not the same, but it's more or less equivalent in terms of responsibility. At that time, I was kind of a lieutenant colonel. No, I was a kind of a major back then.
Like a GS-13 or?
GS-13, right.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with that, I'll use those terms. It's no big deal.
Well, the Guard Reserve, the technician stuff, that's how they do that. Yeah.
Well, I thought they were mostly wage grade, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I came back from school, and they had taken the engine out of the airplane offices and made a special engine office just for engines. They would manage all the engines for the Air Force. And they had a competition for the chief of that operation, and I lost. And I went to my boss and I said, now, wait a minute. I had the engines, and you sent me to school to get smarter, and I did. And you reduced the responsibilities, and you gave the job to somebody else, WTFO. He said, well, we have other things in plan for you. I thought, is that good or bad? I don't know. So I got a job as a branch chief, and I got a promotion to GS-14, which is equivalent to a light colonel.
Yeah.
And I did structural stuff to help bring more rigor to the development of engines, basically. And then I did that for a couple of years. Nothing really exciting happened there for a change, believe it or not. It was more or less routine kind of stuff, minor problems, this and that, and what have you. And then they had a competition for the chief engineer of all the engines in the Air Force, which I won. And the other guy who had taken the other job, I passed him up again. We played leapfrog for our career, basically.
Well, what are these competitions? Like, what are you, how does,
you
how
have
do you
an
compete?
opening.
Okay.
You have an opening, and you apply to get selected to do this. It's not like a selection board in the Air Force or the Navy where you have a record and you go to OERs and you go through the selection board and what have you. Basically, there's an opening. You say, here's a GS-15 or equivalent colonel's job, and we're going to fill that job, and anyone who wants to apply for that job, apply for it, and we'll look at your records, and then we'll pick somebody who hits that job. That's what I meant by in terms of a competition.
I got you.
So I got that job, but the guy who was in charge didn't like me. So I figured, what the hell? So I kind of got on the sidelines of all that. But before this happened, I got to tell you this one. There was a thing called the Great Engine War, where Pratt & Whitney in the F-100 was not doing all that well in the F-16 and F-15.
Yeah.
You may have
Yeah.
recalled that.
Yeah.
And so GE, on their own money, created this thing called the F-101 DFE, F-101 Derivative Fighter Engine. And the F-101 was the engine in the B-1.
Mhm.
And what they did is they kind of shrunk the fan down a little bit, raised the pressure ratio, and made it a fighter engine. And they had a much better control scheme than the F-100 did. And so they started to pedal this thing around. And so we decided, the Air Force decided, we ought to be somewhere in charge of this to make sure that they get the kind of things we need to know.
Yeah.
And so there was a friend of mine named Joe Wood, who was the program manager, and he got put in charge of the program. I was the engineer for him. And we got to get some money. So the Navy had some money hiding someplace for a replacement engine for the TF-30 and the F-14 Tomcat.
Tomcats.
Because the TF-30 was not doing good in the Tomcat.
Yeah.
And I can tell you stories about that too, but that's another story.
No, go ahead.
I got involved in that. All you had a lot of Tomcat guys on. They can tell you all kinds of stories about the TF-30. So he called up the Navy and says, listen, we got this thing going on with GE, but we got a contract. We only got $1 contract with GE to do this. And we need some real money, so we had some real leverage. So could you send us that money? And they thought about it and said, well, you know, what the hell, we ain't going to do anything with it. Why not? So they sent this paperwork to Wright-Patterson to transfer the money from the Navy to the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe took that paperwork and ran down to Evendale, which is right down the street from Wright-Patterson, and put it on contract that very same day.
Wow.
Well, the next day, the Navy calls up and says, we want the money back. And Joe said, sorry, Charlie. It's already on contract.
Too late.
Yeah. So we got our foot in the door with GE, and we were doing great. But then the great engine war started, and we said we're going to compete the next buy of engines for the F-16 between the General Electric, which then became the F-110, and the F-100. And we eventually got to the point where you could actually fly an F-110 and an F-15. And he went out to fly it. And GE's big slogan was, you fly the airplane, not the engine. Because in the F-16, if you got into certain parts of the envelope, the F-100 would not like that too much. And if you got ham-fisted with the go handle, it would quit on you, stall, might stagnate, might do bad things for you. And there were areas, as you well know, in the Dash 1 said, don't go here unless you have to.
Right.
So the great engine war was going on. And so Congress got involved. God help us all. They say, what the hell's going on here? Why is the F-100 such a crappy engine and blah, 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 blah. And General Alton Slay, who was running Systems Command at the time, says, I got to go testify. You guys come up here and fill me in on what's happening. So I said, oh, what do I know? So the boss grabbed all the F-100 guys, because there was dozens and dozens of them, and about 3 of us F-110 guys. And we traipsed up to Andrews Air Force Base. Am I taking too much time for that? I love talking about this stuff.
You keep going. This is awesome. I love it. I mean, the 110, I mean, thank you. Block 30 Big Mouth, just thank you.
Yeah, they had, the way they fixed their problem was they had a really good control scheme, and they ran the engine like it wanted to be run, as opposed to trying to transfer the TF-30 technology into the F-100 engine and run it the same way with the same kind of problems. And that's kind of a nutshell. So we're up there in the blue bedroom, they call it. It's a big conference room where the general takes all his briefings and everything. And he says, okay, I got all the F-100. So what about this F-110? So I gave him a little spiel about what the F-110 was all about. And he wasn't really that interested, because it was just sort of a paper engine at that time. He said, well, you know anything about bore scopes? And I said, yes, sir, I sure do. He says, well, get one. am I going to get a borescope in Washington, D.C.?
Right now? Yeah.
So I get, you're right now, I got to get one the next day. So I get a hold of a guy from Pratt I know, a good friend of mine. And I said, send a borescope up here ASAP. I don't care if you have to fly it up here in your private jet. I don't get it up here. So it shows up the next day. So I go in and see the general. I said, I brought your borescope, boss. I said, how's that work? I said, well, and it had a flexible tip on it. So when you stick this inspection thing into the engine, you can wiggle this end of this thing back and forth to take a look at the turbine and the compressor or whatever else you want to look at inside the engine. He said, that's fantastic. Bring that to Congress. Oh, okay, sir. No problem. So he has this big briefing about what's wrong with the F-100 and how we're going to fix it. And by the way, we're doing this F-110 and it's going to be a competition, blah, 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 blah. And I want to show you something, Senator. This was the Senate Armed Services Committee. I'm sitting in the peanut gallery and he says, Abell, give me that borescope. Yes, sir. Give him the borescope. And he goes up to the front. You know how the Congress sits in these big banquet type of things? Well, one of the senators, and I'm not going to name him, he's not there anymore. And he was a real pain. And he starts giving Slay some crap. And Slay says, well, sir, I want to show you this borescope. And he said, what's that for? He said, well, that's how we inspect engines, see when they're wrong. He takes a borescope, I want to stick it on. He sticks it sort of like that, right in front of the senator's face. And he goes, the senator goes, ah! Damn near falls over backwards in his chair. And I'm sitting back there going, oh, this guy's a 4-star. You can get away with it. What the hell? So he comes back. We go back over to Andrews Air Force Base, and we're all sitting around saying, well, we got rid of that stuff. And the general's exec comes in and says, General Slay would like you all come over to his house tonight. And everybody sort of like this. And the colonel who's in charge of this mob says, well, what's the protocol? I mean, is it dress blues? Is it suits? What is it? I don't know. He's never done it before. So later that day, we go marching over to General Slay's officers' quarters, general officers' quarters, nice house on Andrews Air Force Base. And he meets us at the door, says, come on in, everybody. And he said, he goes out in the kitchen, he opens up the can, he says, here's some liquor up here. Why don't you all have a drink or two? Let's go.
All right.
All right. Is this for real?
Yeah.
So we're all sitting around shooting the shit with the 4-star general at his house.
That's awesome.
Finally, the colonel says, I think it's time for us to go. He says, well, yeah, all right. If you guys want to go, that's fine. You want to stay? That's fine. See you around. Great job today. And off we go.
That's awesome.
That was one of the most interesting events I've ever been involved with.
That is awesome.
But so that F-110 program was really fun because there's like 3 or 4 of us at Wright-Patterson who were involved in it. And then all the guys at GE. And they did a hell of a job on that, as you well know. Yeah. And that engine war and that particular experience really put the coals to Pratt & Whitney. And they finally came up and fixed just about everything that needed to be fixed on the F-100. Now, either one of them is very, very comparable type of operations in the operational system. Well, anyway, after I got done with that, I was at equivalent Colonel GS-15. And again, one of my other bosses calls me up and says, I got a job for you. I said, what is it? And I said, well, I can't tell you right now.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Come down and see me. Okay. So I go down to see him and he says, I got a job for you. I'd be chief engineer. I said, great. What is it? He says, well, I can't tell you. I said, well, where is it? Well, I can't tell you. But it'll be a good job. Be a lot of travel involved, but it'll be a good job for you. I said, well, when can I find out? And he says, well, if you say yes, then in a couple of weeks, I'll tell you what it is.
All right.
So, why not? Why not? So a couple of weeks later, he says, all right, come on back down here. I got to tell you some things. I said, okay. So I go down to his office and he says, come on with me. And we go off into these tunnels underneath the buildings again.
That's awesome.
And there's this big door with a big knob and a do not enter and all the security whiz bang things on it. And he opens up the door and says, come on in here. And I walk in the door, and there's a bunch of guys who I hadn't seen in about 3 years. I always wondered what happened to them. And they were in this room. It turns out that's where they were doing the F-117.
Ooh.
They were doing the start of the B-2. That's where Tacit Blue was. And there was another thing that I was going to be the chief engineer in. And we all operated out of this room with all kinds of interesting things going on. And so as part of that, I can talk about this part. Part of that, I was part of the B-2 source selection.
Wow.
And we did all that in a completely covert, unobservable, direct contact kind of operation. The team that evaluated the two competitors, which I can say was Northrop and Lockheed, we went out to Northrop, and this was something that we all sort of took a big gasp with, because we wasn't sure what Northrop was going to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So they take us in this room and they start showing us pictures of the XB-36, and not 36, 35, and the 49, the flying wings, and the original Northrop flying wing. And we're sitting there going, what are they doing? And then they take us in. They take us in this other room. They show us what their B-2 would look like. Okay, so we stayed there for about 4 weeks evaluating their proposal as what they would do for a B-2. And then we went home for a week, and we went back up to Lockheed for about 4 weeks and evaluated what they were doing. And then we had a briefing and said, this is what we think about Northrop, and this is what we think about Lockheed. And the people who were doing the review of this stuff said, okay, we'll let you know what's going to happen. And they took it off and do whatever they do with source elections, which is interesting, but unknowable.
Were they both flying wing designs? I mean, was it comparable, or was Lockheed completely different?
Lockheed was completely different concept, and that's about all I can say about it.
Okay.
Okay.
Valid.
But the B-2 was the B-2 as it was. Mm-hmm. About the only thing that changed from it was the inlets went from the bottom to the top. Okay. And other than that, it was pretty much the same. And it plan form changed a little bit. And I kind of did the engine part of that stuff for a while. And then there was another competition. And this time another guy got the job, which was the equivalent to a BG. It's an SES, Senior Executive Service, the highest rank you could get in the Air Force or Civil Service. But he turned out he didn't want it after he won it. So the guy who ran the evaluation said to the guy who had made the decisions, why don't we just take the next guy on the list, which was me. And I said,
yeah,
all for that.
I'll take it.
So I got promoted, and I got out of the what we call the black hole, where we're doing all this interesting stuff. And I went back to the home office, kind of like a staff job, which I hated. I hated staff jobs. I always wanted to be program guy. And I was there for about a year. And one day my boss called me up and said, didn't you say you wanted to be the chief engineer on the ATF? And I said, well, yeah. He said, well, you are. I said, really? I said, yeah. Yeah, I and General McMullen decided that you should be the guy. I said, super, when do I start? And he says, we'll get back to you. I said, okay. So about 2 weeks later, I was the chief engineer of the Advanced Tactical Fighter.
Wow.
And at the time, the program was completely different from what it turned out to be. Mm-hmm. There were no airplanes. It was all a avionics laboratory to figure out how you make these common modules and all kinds of fancy avionics stuff. It was a whole bunch of trade studies and wind tunnel testing to see what the actual development airplane was going to be, and a full-scale model of the airplane where they would take it out to the radar range and see what the radar cross-section was going to be. And that was kind of the program. And so we had sent out what was called a request for information. And the reason it happened was The Air Force didn't know whether A, it should be an invisible A7, which they sort of had already called the F-117, or B, an invisible F-15, or C, an invisible SR-71 or A-12.
Wow.
So they were doing all these studies. We had an in-house design team and would do different studies of different airplanes as to what their capabilities were and what have you. And we had wargaming models where you could fly one-on-one or many-on-many in a model to see what the best exchange ratio would be against the opposition, whatever they might be. And so they finally decided that what they really wanted was an invisible F-15 class airplane. Didn't want the F-117 again, didn't want the super streaker. They wanted a dogfighter that was as invisible as it could be.
Yep.
And that's when I got into both. When they finally decided what they wanted, they said they got to have somebody in charge who knows what the hell they're doing.
Nice.
And for some stupid reason, they picked me. But so I got down there, and Northrop was on one of their tours through Wright-Patterson up to Washington to show people what they had. And so they stopped at Wright-Patterson, and I went in a briefing. When they talked about 3 hours for what the F-23, which came to be the F-23, was going to be and what it looked like, et cetera, et cetera. And about a week after that, there was an in-flight incident with a Nighthawk, an F-117. And because I was accessed and I had the background, they said, go find out what's going on. So that involved going out to the skunk works at Lockheed. And we went through what we did, and I can't really talk about a whole lot.
Mm.
And the head of the skunk works, Ben Rich, who you might have heard of, quite famous as a airplane designer, says, I want to show you guys our airplane, which turned out to be the YF-22.
Mm.
So he gets his guys in, and we spent about 3 hours seeing what their airplane would look like. And then I went back to Wright-Patterson. About 2 weeks later, we dropped the RFP, the request for proposal for the program of what turned out to be the YF-22-23 thing. And once you do that, you can't talk to anybody ever again until the proposals are done and the contract signed.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to see the 2 guys that eventually won, which had nothing to do with it. It was just luck of the draw, but nobody else I could see. So,
Yeah.
So this RFP goes out, and we had a big, here's how we're going to evaluate, here's the criteria, here's what we're going to do, blah, 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 all the bureaucratic stuff you go through. And then the word comes down and says, and oh, by the way, you're going to have some airplanes in this thing too. And we said, holy crud, how are we going to do this? Because, we had $1.98 to do this other stuff, and airplanes are like $8,000, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that. So we immediately run up to the Pentagon and say, look, guys, we'll be happy to do this, but, contractors probably like to be paid. And they said, how much? And we told them, and they said, we ain't got that. I said, well, what do you have?
How much you got? We'll make it work.
So we worked with a guy named Mike Lowe, brilliant guy, absolutely brilliant guy, wound up as a commander attack. And he starts sweeping the cupboard, getting money from here and money from there. And he called us up, and the deputy director of the program sitting there with a phone and a kind of a spreadsheet. And he says, Mike comes over and he says, I got you another, whatever, $100 million. Not enough. I said, well, okay, let me go sweep some. It takes about a day of him going through all the closets and cubby holes and every place else to get as much money together as we can. And he says, that's all there is, guys. See what happens. So they said, all right, we got to change the program. So they said, you got to add the airplane. So it's up to me because I did all the technical part of the contract. And so I wrote the requirement for the prototypes. And I think this is exactly the words that I use. It says the contractor will design, build, and construct 2 prototype aircraft, each powered by a different engine that will take off under their own power, period. And that was the requirement for the prototypes. And I got a lot of flack from people who said, well, they got to have so much range, they got to have so much sustained G, they got to have this, they got to have. I said, that ain't going to happen, guys. So why not? I said, well, first thing's going to happen is they ain't going to meet it. And the second thing's going to happen, Congress is going to get involved. We ain't going to get any airplanes.
Yeah. Wow.
So we ain't going to have any requirements. But we got to have requirements. How can we judge them? I said, listen, you have the 7 best airplane companies in the world competing for this job. 2 of them are going to win. And if you don't think they're going to compete to the best of their ability, you're crazy.
Yeah.
So we aren't going to have any requirements. And I fought that battle for years.
Wow.
But I said, I'm not doing it. And they backed me up, so I never did. So we sent the thing out to the contractors, and we sent a little note along by General McMullen. He ran the aircraft development part at Wright-Patterson, and said, teaming is strongly encouraged, because we didn't want somebody to go bankrupt because we didn't have enough money. So the next thing we get word back that says Lockheed, Boeing, and General Dynamics are going to team, and whichever design is picked as the winner, we will all work to make that design happen. Okay. So your call, up to you. But we aren't signing any contracts with any team. We are signing a contract with a prime contractor because we don't want to be referees.
Right.
We just want to evaluate you and how you do your job. Well, Northrop and McAir got wind of that, and they said, me too. So they joined up. Now, this is going to be interesting because, as I recalled, on the YF-17 to YF-18, McDonnell took Northrop and put them in the backseat of the airplane.
Yeah.
And now Northrop put McDonnell Douglas in the backseat of the airplane.
Wow.
So the guy went from the pilot in command to the gib, and then the gib went back to being the pilot in command. And the other guy was the gib. So they worked it out. And then there were 2 other guys, Rockwell and Grumman, and they didn't have a dance partner because everybody else joined up with these other 2 teams. So we waited for the proposals. And in the meantime, somebody says, well, how are you going to evaluate these airplanes? I said, well, I'm not going to. Well, but you can't. We're building an airplane. We got to have something to. So I'm not going to do it because it's not in a contract. So they said, what are you going to do about that? I said, well, look, the whole idea of this program was risk reduction, so that when you start the real development, you don't have a lot of surprises. Mm-hmm. You will have some, but you don't want a lot. You don't want major crud. And so we're going to look at what they're going to do with these airplanes and what they're going to prove to themselves and to us that they can do in the real program. And so we'll use the same criteria to evaluate the program, not the airplane. And we will continue to do the other stuff that we had planned to do already. And you will then evaluate those programs and say who has the best program out of all the submissions.
Yeah.
And so we did it that way. And all 7 contractors sent in their proposals in terms of what they were going to do and what their airplane would look like. I frankly didn't look at their airplanes except to laugh at a couple of them because they were out there. A contractor who will not be named, and the missile launch sites at the shoulders of the pilot. So there would be a trapeze that would come out, and an AMRAAM would go flying past your windscreen.
Right over your shoulder?
And I said, I don't believe that'll be a satisfactory solution.
So it's like shoulder launches?
Yeah,
Wow.
like you would have a bazooka on your shoulder in the cockpit.
Wow.
The trapeze could mount and off it would go. Now, if your windscreen would stand that'd probably be good, but maybe if you shot 2 of them, maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. Much less not being able to see anything. So, there were some different kinds of design concepts. Let's put them that way. So we went through the evaluation, and it was clear that Northrop and Lockheed knew what they were doing. They had the background in stealth, RCS, IR suppression, all the things that you need to make an invisible airplane. I call it invisible for.
Right.
The other guys sort of knew what they were doing, but it was clear that they didn't have the technology in the background to really exploit what you could do with something that you would put in terms of RCS. So it was a pretty easy solution that we got down to the 2 airplanes, and then there was a naming contest of who's going to get what number. And the way it worked was, I said the program director is going to flip a coin, and whoever calls it, the visiting team, and they get first pick of numbers. It'll be YF-22 and YF-23. And I think Lockheed won the coin toss, and they picked YF-22, and Northrop was happy with YF-23. That's how they got their names.
Oh, wow.
And then we also said, now look, you each got to have a GE engine and a Pratt engine in your 2 airplanes. And it's up to you to choose how you're going to do it. And we ain't going to tell you, it's up to you. You just tell us which one you want first. And because we don't want to issue you an engine, it's up to you to pick whichever one you want. And fortunately, Northrop says, we want to put the Pratt engine in our first airplane, and Lockheed said we want to put the GE engine in our first airplane. That's the way it worked out. So we went on our merry way, and Northrop started cutting metal. I mean, as soon as the ink was dry in the contract. And Lockheed kind of fumbled around for a while to figure out exactly what they wanted to do. And so we had what was called a kickoff meeting. After the contract signed, everybody goes out to the contractor and says, do we really understand what you signed up for? Do you really understand what we want? Because now we can actually talk to you and communicate what's going on. So we go roaring out to the West Coast. And we had 3 guys basically that kind of ran the program. The program director. Oh, I got to tell you this story. You love this one. After the source selection, there was a colonel in charge of the program before the source selection, and he was an F-4 pilot, brilliant guy, and quite a salesman, to say the least. And he was the guy who actually got all the program going. A guy named Al Piccirillo, great guy. And he was more of a theoretical type, and got the program started and lived through the source selection where we picked Northrop and Lockheed. And then they needed an executor to actually run the program when it became a real program. So they decided to switch out directors. So I got wind that this guy named Jim Fain was going to come down and talk to me because he was going to be the new program director. I said, okay, good. I can deal with that. I've dealt with a lot of program directors. So I was sitting in my office one Saturday figuring out how to structure something. And I gotten the word that this Fang guy was going to come down and he's going to try and bully me. And I said, really? Okay, I'll see what happens. And it wasn't because he was military and I was civilian. It was just that I'm just not that kind of guy to get bullied. You know, it makes sense to me. I'll do what you're telling. If you don't, I'll tell you to do a pound sand. So I'm sitting in the office, and here comes this guy roaring into my office. He says, who the hell are you? I said, I'm Rick Abell. He said, what the hell do you do here? I said, well, I kind of sort out all this technical stuff, tell you what the options are, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and then you tell us what to do. And he says, really? I said, yeah. I said, no, you don't. I said, really? I said, you help run this program. I said, I can do that too. I said, good, we'll get along. Off he goes. Well, that was interesting. So Faye's going to be in charge, and then he disappears. He doesn't come back for about a month. I'm wondering what's going on. Well, it turns out, in order to be a program director of a big program, you got to go to program school. And he hadn't been to school yet. But he was a hell of a program. He was picked by the chief of staff of the Air Force to be the guy. But he didn't have his ticket checked. So he had to get a waiver, which takes time and it has to go through some congressional hoorah or whatever. So again, it's a Saturday and I'm in the office and I'm doing some more stuff and here comes this Fane guy again. He comes roaring back in. He said, I look up and said, "Oh, you gonna stay this time?" He said, I said, "Well, you know what, hey." But we got along great. He did not suffer fools gladly. He just did not do that. If you didn't know what you were talking about, you were gone.
Wow.
He's a former heavy driver. He flew the 52s out of K.I. Sawyer when he was a second John. He flew the drones off the B-52s.
Wow.
And when he took a tour in Nam in the F-4s and came back and was the lead test pilot for Lantern pods on the A-10.
Holy crap. Wow.
He didn't take any noise out of that either. And he kind of whipped Martin Marietta into shape till the Lantern finally started doing what it was supposed to. So he came to Wright-Patterson as a program director, and that's what the chief knew about him, that he never promised more than he could deliver. And they had a list of 10 guys, I think, I've been told this, and he was like number 6 or something, and chief goes down the list, says, take this guy, he's the guy. And that was the end of it. And
jeez.
He came in. Just to get under skin every once in a while, I kind of outranked him on the protocol side, not in the structure system.
Yeah.
But when you go someplace, you get a protocol rank. And I outranked him. So just to get under his skin, when we went down to TAC headquarters and I got put in the Dodd House, which is for, like presidents and people. And he was over in the queue. I said, "Boss, you want to come over and have a drink at my house?" He said, "Yeah, okay, I won't do that again." But I kept doing it. And we got along great. So
awesome.
So we start the program, and then I'll get back to where I was. We start the program, and we go out to Northrop, and Northrop's out there. Our airplane will do this, and it's going to do that, and it's got this display, and you can see everybody in the universe who might shoot at you, and and we can do blah 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 blah. They're going on and on and on and on. Like I said, there were 3 guys who were kind of running the show: the engineer, the finance and contracts guy, who was Colonel Tom Bucher, great guy, smart guy, absolutely brilliant guy, and Jim Fane, the program director. It was called the Fog. Okay. So I'm sitting there and I'm kind of listening to what's going on because I know it's all paper. Paper airplanes always beat real airplanes. They never do exactly what they're supposed to do. So I'm taking and Booker, who's the program manager type, keeps wondering how they're going to do this. What's the plan? Where's the schedule? What's the this? Where's the money? Blah, blah, blah. He's getting on, best sweat's running down his face. What's going on? So I said, don't worry about it. So then we would roll up to Lockheed, and Lockheed comes out with all these charts about we're going to do this first, and we're going to do that, and that feeds into this, and this goes over here, and the money goes this way, and blah, blah, blah. And they got all these management plans, and Tom's going there, yeah. And so I pull out one of the little napkins they give you to drink your coffee on, and I write a little note on it, and I pass it down to him. And he opens up the note, and he goes, "Oh, no." And what I'd written on a note, I said, "This is all very interesting, but where's the airplane?" They never showed the airplane.
Yeah.
But they had all the plans about how they were going to make the airplane. So I said, I got Fane and Tom together that night, and I said, "Listen, from what I have observed, Northrop is an engineering company who've hired some managers. And Lockheed is a management company who've hired some engineers. And if you look at the way they're running the program, you'll see that. Now, both of them are very capable of delivering what the product's going to be. They're just going to go about it in a different way. Mm-hmm. The engineers are going to kind of run what Northrop's doing, and the program managers are kind of going to do what Lockheed's doing. And if you keep that separate, you can see what's going on and be able to figure out how to deal with them."
Yeah.
And that was the story of the whole show. There was one program manager for Lockheed for the whole program. There was one chief engineer for Northrop for the whole program. There were a whole bunch of program managers from Northrop and a whole bunch of chief engineers for Lockheed. That's just the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
They probably have changed by now. Don't know. But that's the way you worked it.
Yeah.
So the program starts and off we go. Now we got assigned some guys down in TAC DR. And if you may be familiar with TAC DR, DR sets the requirements for airplanes for Tactical Air Command. And they put out the operational requirements document. It says, we want an airplane that's going to do A, B, C, D, E. And we turn that into a specification for an airplane that's going to do A, B, C, D, E.
Mm.
And they had set out this operational requirements document that you would have basically the Klingon Death Star. It was going to do everything to everybody. And the reason for that is they listen to the companies, and the companies will tell you, yeah, man, it's going to make gas when it goes on a mission. It'll carry 17 AMRAAM. And you'll be able to see the universe from a cockpit. And, you know, we'll have some of that.
Yeah.
They write it in an order. And so he said, oh, yeah, man, there's the art of the possible and there's the art of what you want to try to do. And we're going to try to do some stuff. And some of the stuff, you just got to knock this crap off. And so DR, we've got assigned some really good fighter pilots to work with us. And they would give us the input of what a fighter pilot really needs in an air-to-air, air-to-ground, any kind of mission. And they would keep feeding us what they wanted based on what they needed. And sometimes we say, well, that's very interesting, but we ain't going to get that because it ain't going to work. It ain't going to work now, but it might work 10 years from now. Okay. So this feedback we had with the TAC DR guys went very well. And the basic objective of the ATF programs is a 50,000 pound airplane, $35 million flyaway. And that's what they wanted. And they set that as a hard objective. It was not a requirement, but it was a hard objective. So while the contractors are building their prototypes, because it took about 3 years to do that, they were also doing these studies and things and building models and all the other good stuff that engineers love to dibble in to figure out what's the art of the possible. And so we would talk to DR. He says, well, hey, we can't do this. Like, you want X number of missiles in the airplane, we can only do Y. And you want this thrust reverser because you want to land on a battle damaged runway, but that's going to weigh, 18,000 tons and burn the back of the airplane off. So it's probably not a good idea, but we're going to try that and see what happens. So we had these interchanges with TAC, and we had this big meeting probably about a year into the program. I guess it was a year. Life gets foggy when you get old. And we went roaring down to TAC. My boss had a series of charts that says, we work with your staff. We came with the trade-offs. We're going to not do this. We're going to not do that. We're going to not do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And the net result is what we think we're going to get you is a 50,000 pound airplane, $35 million. It's a killer. And Bob Russ was the commander of TAC at the time, 4-star. And he looks at all that and he says, that's bullshit. And everybody goes, what have we done? He says, you know what the hell you're talking about. So he said, okay, sir. He says, all right, thanks. And we all get back in the airplane, back to Right Pitiful.
Right.
So that's what the Edwards guys called Wright Patterson. The test guys out of test pilots, right Pitiful back there in Dayton. So Fang gets on the horn to his boss and says, listen, I'm gone. He says, what do you mean? This is Mike Lowe again. He was 2-star then? Yeah, 2-star.
What year is this? Like what year, what time frame?
This was 85.
Holy
86.
crap.
It's ancient history.
Wow.
So he goes, I'm fired, better get somebody else. I screwed it up. And General Lowe says, what happened? So he explains what happened. We worked with TAC-DR. We came up with alternatives. We came up with something they should change the order to be and blah, 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 blah. And General Lowe says, hold on, don't do anything. I said, okay. So he does something. Don't know what it was. Don't want to know what it was. But the next thing we get back is General Lowe calls up Colonel Fain, says, all right, you're on the program. You got 1 week. Go back down there and fix this. You got a second chance. He says, thank you, sir. So he looks at me and says, Abel, what the hell are we going to do? I said, I'll tell you what. Give me an idea here. So I said, what I'm going to do is going to take the airplane that meets all the ORD requirements that costs $11 trillion and weighs 17,000 tons. And I'm going to start a series of design changes to make you see what happens if you change certain critical parameters on the airplane. So can you do that? I said, I can do that. No, it ain't going to be pretty, but it'll be doable. So for the next week, I took my guys, and because the Northrop airplane was a little more stable, I used that as a baseline. And I made 4 basic decision trees. A, weapons carriage. They wanted 8 plus 4. Which one going to happen?
Whoa.
Well, that's what they wanted.
Yeah, I want it too. Jeez.
Well, sure you do.
Yeah,
why not?
I'm in.
When you go down and buy your new car, you want all that stuff. But
Yeah.
you pay for it? Oh, wait a minute. No, you're going to pay for it? Ah. So I said, okay, weapons. Now we got range. And that's gas. And that's volume. And that's structure. And that's weight. And that's money. Then we got avionics. We got these side-looking radars. We got these forward-looking radars. We got these back-looking radars. We got like radars look up your butt. We got radars all over this airplane. And I'm going to start getting rid of stuff of this avionics stuff in this tree. And then over here, we got signature. And we can make it more visible. So I had these 4, if I remember, I had 4 separate trees where I start taking things out of the airplane. And down at the bottom of each one of these trees was a 50,000-pound, $35 million airplane. And each step, you come down in range, or you come down in payload, or you come down in maneuverability, or you come down in the avionics suites. And anywhere along the line, you could stop for a certain price and a certain weight. And I said, boss, you can let me brief these, or you can brief them. And the way I brief them, if I was you, is just say, like it's a Chinese menu, General. I mean, here's the different options you can have to meet your end objective of 35 and 50. And he said, I'll take it. I said, I would expect that. Who in the hell wants to see a civilian up there? So I understand that. It's no problem to me. So I make up these charts, and they had these 4 trees. And I said, and we all roared down back to TAC to Bob Russ. He says, all right, what you got now? So I said, okay. General Fain, and Colonel Fain at the time, gets up there and he starts, sir, we understand what you're looking for. Here is a way to look at the options you have. And he starts going down the tree with this one and down the tree with that, and this one and that one. And he goes through all the briefing. He says, here's how we can fix this and blah, blah, blah. And Russ says, I like it. All right. As of right now, you can take the thrust reverser and throw that off the airplane. I ain't going to use that. Too much weight, complexity. It doesn't buy me a whole hell of a lot. If I can't get the prime beef guys to fix the runway in time, what the heck? And you can get rid of those side-looking radars. I mean, if you're invisible, you can see far enough in front, you got first look, first shot, first kill. That's good enough. Get rid of those things. You pick a couple other ones and says, all right, when you're done, come back down here every year with what you know, and we'll do some more of this. So everybody looks at each other and goes, Sierra Hotel. And we roar back up to back up to Right Pitiful and start working it that way. And what had happened in my interpretation, it's just my personal interpretation, is that the TAC DR guys weren't communicating sufficiently with the commander about the decisions they were making in terms of what to trade versus what to keep. And he felt that he wasn't getting enough insight as to what the devil was going on with his new airplane. And as soon as we understood that, and the DR community understood that, it went a lot smoother. So every year we would go along and said, here's what we found out about XYZ. We still think this is viable. We should do that. And this other stuff is starting to be a little longer range. Perhaps we should drop that. And we traded the whole thing back and forth through the whole series of programs to finally come up with the final answer of what we were going to ask for in full-scale development. In the meantime, the prototypes are coming along, and we didn't want anything to do with those things in terms of taking those as Air Force property. That has a lot of problems. We let the contractors keep them. And what we did is says, you go get an N number for those airplanes from the FAA.
Really? Experimental aircraft? Like,
Absolutely.
wow.
If you will look closely at pictures of the YF-22 and YF-23, you will see on their tails, it's N-22 YF and N-22 FY.
Yeah.
No, same thing for Northrop. And what we did is we cleared a designated engineering representative from the FAA to go out and do an inspection of these 4 airplanes and issue them an airworthiness certificate, just like you would do if you built your airplane in your basement.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, we did our own safety reviews and other things like that, but they were not an Air Force asset. They were a contractor asset they were using to develop their program. But you go out, you take a look sometime.
Yeah. No, I got to look.
N number on the back of the airplane.
Holy crap. Is that the first time? I had previous, like the F-16?
I don't know. I just thought it was a hell of a good idea. No, the F-16s and 17s were Air Force airplanes.
Oh, okay.
We took title to them.
Yeah.
We did not take title to them. The way it typically works, you take title to them, then bail them back to the contractor for their use.
Gotcha.
So came time for the flying, and Northrop always felt they had lost the YF-17, YF-16 program because they were second, and they were going to be first. And that's why they took the Pratt engine, because they thought it was further along. And they did fly first. Well, about 2 years before the first flight of these airplanes, I said, all right. I called up both chief engineers. I said, I want you to send me something. I want you to send me what I call a sealed envelope. And the sealed envelope will have what you predict your airplane will do when it is in flight test. I know what your flight test plan is. I already got that. And that's fine. You can do that. But I want you to tell me in this envelope, 2 years before you fly it, what the sustain G is going to be, what the accel rate's going to be, what the turn rate's going to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And give me a list of about 10 things you will demonstrate in that flight test program. So I will have confidence that when you promise me something in the full-scale development program, that you're pretty certain you're going to do that.
Yeah.
But it's not a requirement. I don't care if your sustain G is 1.1. Doesn't matter to me. If that's what you want to demonstrate, that's fine with me. If you want to demonstrate 9 Gs, that's okay with me. But you write it down on a piece of paper, and you will be evaluated on how close you came to what you said.
Wow.
Now, again, this is simple. This is a competition. You think somebody's going to say, yeah, I'm going to sustain 1.1 Gs.
No.
That's my airplane. You think that's going to happen? Ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
So it was pretty simple to me to figure this stuff out. But, you know, the system just didn't understand this kind of stuff. They said, you got to have requirements. How can we hold our feet to the fire? I said, we gave them the money. I mean, what the hell you want? So they sent me the sealed envelope, and I kept it. And when they took their first flight, I had a little ceremony in the program house, opened it up, said, here's what these guys are going to do. And believe it or not, they both did pretty much what they said they were going to do. I said, okay. So came time for the big showdown. Now, There was never any, to my recollection, any duplicate points between the two companies. So you couldn't say at 30,000 feet, 9/10 Mach number, the YF-23 did this, and at 30,000 feet, 9/10 Mach number, the YF-22 did that. You couldn't really say that because there was no requirement. There was no fixed point that says 9/10, 30,000 feet, 9G sustained. Didn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
So I did it that way. So it came time for the proposal for the full-scale development program. And I said to the company, I said, I don't want a technical volume. Now, the way a typical proposal is they send you a contract, says we're going to do all this stuff here. They send you a specification that says the airplane will do that. And they send you a estimate of cost and says it's going to cost this and the schedule is going to take that. Then they send you a truckload of books saying why you should believe all that. Now, none of that stuff goes on contract. It's just the spec, the schedule, the cost, the performance. But all that other stuff is to make you feel good that they know what they're doing. So I called up the contractors and I said, you guys always whine that you spend millions and millions of dollars building all these books to convince the government that you know what you're doing. Now, I've been living with you guys for 4 years, and I can't tell you that I'm going to be the technical evaluator, but you might think I might be the technical evaluator, and I know what you can do. So I don't need all that stuff. And I can save you tens of millions of dollars. And they say, no, you have to have it. Oh, okay. So you want to spend the tens of millions of dollars? Oh, absolutely. So all that whining about how much it costs to do a proposal is so much horse hockey. No, you need it. Okay, fine.
We need
So
it.
I said 300 pages. He said, no, I can't do it in that. It's got to be 500 pages. I said 200 pages. He said, wait a minute. You're going the wrong way. So we finally negotiated 300 pages of technical, this is why we can do this. Trust me. So you give them, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, something like that. They hire all the outside guys, spend millions of dollars writing these books and blah, 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 blah. And they sent it into the program office and it became paperweights. Didn't read it. Why should I read it? I'm not going to put it on contract. You tell me you're going to do this, 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 and this. I said, show me where that's in the contract. It isn't. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, what good is this? Does it make you feel good? So I said, okay. I never read the damn thing. So we go through the evaluation and basically said, both airplanes meet the requirement. We think that they will achieve what they said in the specification. We believe the schedule is realistic. We believe the costs are a little understated, but that's typical. And the schedule looks reasonable. And so pick them. Up to you. And this was a fruition of what I had told Fane when he first met me. He had the idea that we had to make sure we had the best airplane. And I told him, let me give you a little story. You remember the controversial TFX I started this lecture with on this channel? Well, what actually had happened is there were two competitors, Boeing and General Dynamics. The Air Force felt the Boeing solution was the absolute best airplane. However, the system didn't think so. And they said, you aren't listening, Air Force. General Dynamics has the best airplane. And the Air Force went back and said, no. We went to Boeing airplane. Said, read my lips. The General Dynamics airplane is the best airplane. Roger that. And they got the General Dynamics airplane. So I told Fane, I said, now look, if we don't make sure that both of these airplanes are going to meet the requirement we could get stuck with something that happened the last time I got involved in this stupid idea. And he said, never thought of that. I said, well, that's what I suggest you do and manage this program. And he said, okay. And that's what happened in the source selection. We went up there and said, technically, Lockheed will do it. Northrop will do it. There's some strengths with Northrop. There's some weaknesses with Northrop. There's some strengths in Lockheed. There's some weaknesses in Lockheed. Nothing we can't overcome. So you pick them. Cost or didn't want to worry about it. Not my job. Okay. But both of them were reasonably cost. So we briefed the guys that make the decision. It goes up to the Pentagon. Things happen. I have zero idea how or why or what happened to pick Lockheed over Northrop. But as I told a guy from the Los Angeles Times once when he kept bugging me in an interview, don't you think Northrop had the better airplane? I said, listen to me. Both airplanes and systems met the requirement. I don't care if they played horseshoes on the White House lawn to pick the winner. The Air Force would have got what it asked for. And they quoted me in the Los Angeles Times. and I believe that to this day. And why they picked Northrop or why they picked Lockheed, I didn't care.
Yeah.
Because the fighter pilots and the maintainers were going to get an airplane that was going to do what they needed it to do. And that's all I cared about. Because I make killing machines. And they were both damn fine killing machines. And if they picked Northrop, I'm happy. They picked Lockheed, I'm happy. They picked Lockheed and off we went.
Wow.
Picked Pratt & Whitney and off we went. That's the way it came out.
Holy crap.
Well,
Wow.
people think that the best airplane is always going to win. Well, I got news for you. It doesn't. I give you the controversial TFX, where I started my life. How much time am I?
We got as much time as you need. No, you got plenty of time. We're at your schedule. Whatever you got. We still haven't even gotten to the C-17.
Well, I'll get there. So we start off we have the kickoff meeting. We go out there. Lockheed's happy. Yeah. And we kind of ran the program office like a fighter squadron. I mean, it wasn't flying and it wasn't in combat. And nobody got shot at, except if you went to the wrong part of Dayton. But in any event, we had Friday night beer calls.
Yeah.
Every week we go over there and shut the place down. About 2:00 in the afternoon, have some beers, pass out flight suits to the kids that never flown airplanes or anything, and issue call signs and you name it. Typical fighter pilot, except it wasn't at the O Club. Right. It was at the program office. So I was over there one day, and the Colonel Fain had risen through the ranks down till now. He was a three-star, and there was another guy, Bob Raggio, who was the program director for the F-22. And we were in the full-scale development, past the preliminary design review, where you make sure you got everything that you need to know, what you're going to have to do, what the requirements really are, the trade-offs, and blah, 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 before you start cutting metal. So Fain comes up to have a beer, and we're standing around talking with Raggio and Fain and blah, blah. And so General Fain says, all right, you two over to the office. Uh-oh. I've had these calls before. So we go over to the program office, and General Fain says, sit down and talk to you guys. It's okay. He says, Rick, you heard the C-17 is in a lot of trouble. I said, yeah, I heard that. And man, it was in a lot of trouble. He said, he got tasked to run a recovery program to figure out what needed to be done to C-17, shoot it in the head, buy more of them, to do whatever needed to be done. And the net result was, and I had read this in the paper, that they had to restructure the C-17 program. And the Department of Defense basically said, if you guys can't shape this thing up in a year or two, we ain't buying any more of them, period. End of story. That's the end of it. And that was the marching orders to Douglas at the time, McDonnell Douglas at the time. And the reason it got into that situation is that the Air Force, in their infinite wisdom, decided to say, this is a fixed price contract. This is all the money you're going to get. And you have to do everything you signed up to. And the sums that they signed up to win the contract were absurd. I mean, honest to God, absurd. And so the contractor would say, we can't do this. We need more money. And the government says, no, you don't understand. We gave you all the money you're going to get. You're going to have to do that. If you don't, we're going to beat you up. And the contractor said, yeah, we're going to quit. And, you know, it was really a mess. And so basically the DOD said, if you don't fix this with the money we have given you, we ain't buying any, end of story. Because typically what happens is, when it gets to that point, the government gives in and gives them more money. Well, this time they weren't going to. So here we are sitting in the office. I had heard all this stuff, and I said, well, it got nothing to do with me, because I've been in tactical airplanes since 1964, and this was like 1993. And I've only dealt with TAC. I dealt a little bit with SAC, which was interesting. Never dealt with AMC. So Joe Fain says, we're going to restructure this program. So I heard that. He said, who do you think ought to run the program? I said, well, I don't know. I assume that General Raggio's not available since he's running the F-22. So I would say Ron Kadish, who was a full colonel running the F-16 at the time, I believe. He said, you're right. That's who's going to do that. I said, okay. He says, who do you think should be the program director for McDonnell Douglas? I said, well, I don't know many of those guys, but Don Kozlowski, he was the guy who was second in command on the YF-23 program from McDonnell Douglas. I said, Koz is a great guy. I think he can handle it. He says, you're right. He's going to do it. So that's good. He says, and you're going to like it too.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
I see. So when does this happen? He says, well, we got to clear this up through the chain and all that kind of good stuff. So it'll probably be about 2 or 3 weeks. I said, okay. So I wait around at the F-22, doing what I was doing. Get the call one day. I said, all right, you're going to C-17. I said, all right, fine. So I go over to C-17 program office, and I knew Colonel Kadish reasonably well. So, and he was a 130 pilot. He flew for TAC and he flew for MAC back when he was flying. And so he knew TAC and he knew MAC. And when you operate in TAC, it's completely different than operating in AMC. And so I said, I've never dealt with these guys. What's the difference? And he said, let me tell you a little story. I said, okay. So well, there was a mission to Timbuktu. I said, what, are you pulling my chain? He says, no, the real Timbuktu in Africa. It was a relief mission. And there were 141s and 130s bringing in relief. And it was in some not world-class airport, let's say. And there's this stack of 130s and 141s coming in, bringing in supplies. And the 130s land and they drive off and park. And then a 141 comes in and lands and stops in the runway. And he gets on the HF radio and calls up Scott Air Force Base, the headquarters, and says, where do I park?
Where do I park?
I said, you gotta be kidding me. He says, no. So a 130 guy who had been in TAC and they'd gone back and forth, sees what's happening, knows what's happening, grabs a couple of wands, runs out on the runway and starts giving this to get this guy off the runway because there's this whole line of airplanes coming out of the sky.
Yeah.
He says, "Does that tell you anything?" I said, "It sure as hell does." And that right away told me I never really understood why a TAC guy was usually in command of MAC or AMC. It's because AMC is very, very structured in terms of the way they operate their Air Force. It's by the book. And the book doesn't have an answer. It's something foreign to them, and they have to do something about it. And so they're very, very structured, which is not good or bad. It's just the way they are.
Right.
Whereas TAC, or the Tactical Air Forces, like you say, and all the other guys, are taught to be more independent thinkers, that you're in a tactical situation, you need to react to the tactical situation. You've learned all the skills, you can apply them however you need to apply them in that particular situation. Whereas an airlifter, unless they're in the support role for insertions and things like that, they're more like a scheduled kind of operation.
Yeah. And
that's just the way they are. And so when it comes time for new things, it's kind of a foreign operation to them, and it takes them for a while to get onto that kind of story. And that's why they typically put a TAC guy in there who can see that and help direct that whole organization to adapt to that.
Wow.
So the guy that was in charge of AMC when I was there was Ron Fogelman, who later became chief of staff.
Yep.
And he was a TAC guy, really great guy, absolutely one of the top generals I've ever met. And I've met a lot of them. And he had a good insight as to what needed to be done. So my first task was to figure out what's going on here. And so I got out the spec. I started reading through it, and I picked out the most absurd requirement I could possibly find, which was a tire has to last hundreds of landings. I think it was 400 landings.
Holy crap.
Now think of that.
400 landings.
It's a 500,000-pound airplane.
Wow.
And the spec says the tire's got to land, I don't know, pick 100. Maybe it was 100. I don't remember, but it was something ludicrous. So I get on the horn and I call up the test wing out at Edwards, and they have a joint test wing where they have people from AMC and the test wing doing the actual flight testing of the airplane. I only have one at the time. And I said, I'd like to talk to the guy who's the test wing commander. Who are you? And I told him who I was, and he said, all right. So I said, look, you keep sending me these deficiency reports about how these tires aren't lasting 100 landings or 400 or whatever the hell it was. And you know and I know that's never going to happen. He said, well, but it's in the contract. I said, but it's never going to happen. Well, it's in the contract and it's in the order. So if it doesn't meet it, we have to send you a deficiency report. I said, well, I'm not going to do anything with it because it ain't going to happen. It's physically impossible. Well, we'll send you another one. I said, okay, fine. So I said, I ain't going to talk to him anymore. So then I call up headquarters AMC and I said, can I talk to the DR guys? They said, who are you? And I go through all that stuff again. I said, could you please change your order to say something like 25 landings per tire? No. Well, why not? Well, they signed up in the contract. I said, they could have signed up to have an anti-gravity machine. It ain't going to happen. Would you please change the order so we can get off the dime here? No. I said, okay. I'm going to talk to them guys anymore. So we went out to, it's another funny story. You get the intention. I don't take a lot of guff off of guys.
No, not at all.
So we go out to McDonnell Douglas, and my first meeting at McDonnell Douglas, okay? And meeting's supposed to start at 9:00, and we're having coffee and donuts, and chit chat, hum. And I sit down in my chair next to the boss, and it's 5 after 9, and it's 10 after 9, and then it's quarter after 9. I stand up and say, "All right, everybody in your seat. We're going to start the meeting now." Who the hell's this guy? So I later find out that some of the guys said, "Well, he ain't going to last long." And if I recollect, the guys that said that weren't there for very long either. And I was there a long time. So we said, all right, now here's the problem. We have to have an honest assessment of what the C-17 can do. And I know you know what that is. And I think I know what it is. And so we're going to take some time, a couple weeks, and come together and say, here's what we're really going to shoot for. Here's what the range is going to be. Here's the number of landings of tires. There's going to be all this other hoo-ha. And we're going to go out there and execute that. And we're going to come up with a program that says, here's the steps we're going to do for this, and here's the steps we're going to do for that, and here's the steps we're going to do for this. And we're going to check those off as we make progress. And by the time we're done, if we do what we said we're going to do, you're going to sell a hell of a lot of airplanes, and the Air Force is going to get a good piece of equipment. And we made a pact. Cos was in there. John Kozlowski, the program manager, says, everybody hear that? That's what we're going to do. And that's the way we did it. And it took about 3 years, and it was on track, and they started buying airplanes, and everybody was happy, except the Army.
The Army?
The Army, paratroopers.
Okay.
Okay. There was one guy who shall remain nameless. He was a two-button, the equivalent of something in the requirements group for the 18th Airborne Corps, which includes 101st. What's the other one? I don't remember. And what was happening was, because this is such a big freaking airplane, the wingtip vortices were stronger than they were on a 141. And the problem was that when the guys would jump out the sides of the airplanes, the wingtip vortices would kind of make them drift towards the center line of the airplane.
Oh, crap.
And that's not a good thing.
That's bad.
That is really not a good thing. And occasionally they would touch chutes. Again, not a good thing. Absolutely not a good thing.
Yeah.
Never did a jump. Never want to do a jump. Took parachute training, took ejection seat training. Don't want to do that. So we made an agreement with Harry Shelton, who was 4-star commander of the 18th Airborne Corps, that whatever we did, it would be as good as the 141. Because we were getting all this hate mail from this two-button who says you got to make sure nothing ever happens, which is impossible.
Right.
So General Shelton, who was 4-star, he eventually wound up to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He gets together with Fogelman, and they make a plan. We didn't hear about this. So we go down there for one meeting with headquarters AMC, tell them about what we're doing, how we're making progress, blah, 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 blah. And after the meeting's over, Joe Fogelman says, all right, everybody out of the room except you two, pointing to me and Colonel Kadish. And I thought, well, I've finally done it. I'm finally going to get the axe.
This is it.
This is the end. It's been a good ride, but what's going to happen? So he says, all right, now this is going to be secret. Yes, sir. General Sheldon and I are going to jump out of the C-17.
Holy crap.
And we go, ah! Yes, sir. Understand, sir. Why do you ever please, sir? Because when Fogelman was at the academy, he had earned his jump wings. So he went down there secretly, Fort Benning, and requalified as a paratrooper.
Holy crap.
General Sheldon was, of course, qualified as a paratrooper. And they're making this plan, and then the word gets out this is going to happen. So I find this shirt, and it's Wile E. Coyote on the shirt. and he's in a chute. It's in streamers, and it's got Acme on the risers. And down the bottom says, Acme, a product you can trust. I says, send that to Fogelman. And Colonel Cadish, being a colonel and Fogelman being a 4-button, he says, I don't think I want to do that. And I said, no, he's a great guy. He'll like it. You like it. Go on, take a gamble. What the hell? Said, all right, I'll do it. So he packs up this shirt, sends it off to Fogelman's exec and says, give this to the boss. And then we don't hear anything.
Uh-oh.
So it comes time for the jump, and they go Hollywood. Hollywood's what they call when you just have your parachute and survival gear. You don't have the bag of stuff. You don't have all the gear hanging down. It's called a Hollywood because that's the way it looks real sexy. So both Sheldon and Fogelman go out the doors, fly out the window, land safely, no big deal. And about 3 days later, here comes the shirt back. And it's autographed. It says, unlike Acme, you make a great airplane. Ron Fogelman, Commander AMC. And another one said, I think Sheldon says, great airplane, our guys need it. Harry Sheldon, Sink, 18th Airborne Corps.
Wow.
So we had it framed and hung it up in the program office.
That is awesome.
He was a great guy. Both of them were. And the 2-button who kept giving, I'll give you another story about him. We went up to the Pentagon, to the T&E guys for the Army, to explain what we were going to do with the C-117 to make it like a C-141. And we had done film of guys coming out of a 141 where you could see them banging off the fuselage, which is not good, right, but it happens. So we're not going to have that. We're going to have it as infrequently as it happens in the 141. So this 2-button who was giving us all kinds of hell says it never happens. And I say, sir, we have, no, it doesn't. Sir, no, it isn't. I'm going, so I'm standing up in front of this crowd saying, what the hell do I do with this? So the guy in charge of T&E for the Army, he says, well, all right, we'll discuss this later. I said, thank God. Because I've had movies of guys going boom off the side of the airplane. This guy says never happens. In the meantime, some jump master says, sir, I've got about 3,000 jumps and I've hit the airplane several times. No, you haven't. Oh, Jesus.
Yes, sir.
Help me. So there is karma. There is definitely karma. Apparently that individual jumped out of the C-17 one time and everything was fine. And he landed and he fell and broke his arm.
Oh.
And
karma.
I just say there is karma.
How did you fix it? How did you fix the problem?
We put deflectors on the door so that the slipstream of the airplane made sure that there was clear air or turbulent air right behind the deflector. So there wasn't any force drawing the people back into the fuselage, which is why it happens. You get kind of a boundary layer effect along the fuselage where there's lower pressure in it, and that pressure draws air towards the airplane. It doesn't suck it all the way in, but it affects the dynamics of the guy coming out of the airplane. So you put a deflector to break up that airflow, and that keeps them somewhat separated from the door, and it only happens occasionally. We couldn't really do a whole lot about the parachutes touching once they were free stream and the chutes were open, except to try and stagger the way the guys would come out of the airplane so there was spacing between the two of them.
Gotcha.
And I think they had to make some changes to their doctrine in terms of the number of troopers that could go out in a certain time frame, because otherwise you get them spread all out over the ground. They can't regroup to take the ground that they're going to go after.
Gotcha.
But they were happy with it, and it's been fine ever since.
Wow.
So after all that was over, I decided it was time to get out of here because I'd done this for a long time. Uh-huh. And I had only spent 3 years with AMC, and I didn't want to spend any more. But they're just different, and I was just not used to that kind of Air Force. And so I decided to retire, and I asked General Cady, at that time, he was a 3-button to come down and do my retirement ceremony, which we had in the Air Force Museum. They put the
that's cool.
planes I worked on around the stage, and they had the flags and the whole deal. And General Case got up and told everybody what a wonderful person I was. And I said, yeah. And I've been talking for about an hour and a half, telling you how great I am, and that's all crap. But it was kind of neat. He kind of laid it on, kind of having an annual speech, and everybody went home.
That is awesome.
And then my next career started.
Yes.
I started as a consultant, and the first job I had was to go review this F-22.
What year is this? What year is this as the?
It's 97.
So the F-22 is still not even close to IOC.
Correct, but it's
4
years into development. You know what you got.
Yeah.
The biggest problem the F-22 had in development was Congress. Simple as that. And if you look at any studies of why development programs get messed up, the number one reason is instability of funding.
Yeah.
It's generally not the technical problems, although it can be, like on the 111. It's generally not the threat. It's generally something that says, we got to have money to fund something else. And the money disappears, and you have to stretch the program. You lose continuity. You can't get done what you need to do. Things get on. It just snowballs. And what happened to the F-22 was about a year after they signed the contract, we had a funding profile that would allow it to be operational. And Congress took it and cut it in half. And we had to adjust the whole damn program. And it just stretched out and stretched out and stretched out. And that's basically the basic problem in the F-22 development program.
When would it have been ready at the original cost? Like, what would the original cost have been, and when would it have been ready? Would it have been significantly cheaper? And
I bet you a dime dollar to a donut that it would have come in on schedule. It would have been overcost by probably 10 or 15%, maybe 25, but it would have been on time, and it would have met most of the requirements. Wow. Now, I'm just saying that you may take that with a grain of salt because it was my program, but I really believe that.
Yeah.
Because when you have to do something like that, it's like paying your car payments.
Yeah.
You know, you figure to pay $400 a month for 3 years, and then you decide to pay $200. And by the time you got it paid off, it's a piece of junk.
Yeah.
Well, stuff happens when you stretch things out. And that you can take any kind of study. Rand's done them, the Pentagon's done them, everybody's done them, and says, the single biggest problem you have in the development of a new weapon system, be it Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Now the Marines never do anything wrong. But anything like that, the single biggest problem is continuity of funding. If you don't fund the program the way it was laid out, bad things happen. No question about it. Technical problems arise, no question about it. Some of them can be major, most of them can be handled. And you will always overrun. There is no question in my mind. Because we always estimate what the program is going to cost, and it's always more the contractor says.
Yeah.
And we're always short. So, but that's the single biggest problem you always have. So anyway, I retired. I got called up by the guy, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force. He says, we need your help. I said, doing what? He says, we want you to review the F-22. I said, okay, fine. Guys will be in contact with you. I said, okay, great. Turns out it was the president of Lockheed Skunk Works, retired. The commander TAC, Mike Lowe, the fellow I talked about, brilliant guy. Another guy who I never really got to know, but I think he was in the business of overhauling airplanes. You know, very, very senior guy. Mm-hmm. And a former assistant secretary of the Air Force. And me.
Wow.
So the former assistant secretary of the Air Force calls me up and says, we want you to join the team. I say, yeah, I heard that. I'll be happy to do that. He says, well, what do you charge? I said, I don't know. I've never done this before.
How much you
I'm a plain spoken guy.
Yeah.
So he said, okay, fine, you'll get what we get. And I said, well, who's we? And he tells me these 3 or 4 guys. And I said, that don't sound bad. So, so they did. I'm not going to tell you because it'll embarrass you. So my next job comes up. It says, oh, you got to go look at the F-100 engine again. Overhaul problems. Okay, I'll do that. So they subbed this out through a Beltway Bandit, a consulting firm. This guy calls me up and he says, we want you on this team. I said, okay, fine. He says, here's what we pay. And I said, well, that's not my usual rate. Having had one job. So he says, well, what is it? And I told him. He says, okay, we'll pay that. I said, okay, fine. I said, this consulting job is okay.
Well, wait, what happened with the F-22? Did anything groundbreaking?
It was what we thought. It's what we thought. You stretch the program. You change some of the requirements because the requirements change, because the thing takes longer. You have to start over certain things and you get into trouble.
Yeah. No
serious trouble, just into trouble. And because it's such a high vis program, any trouble becomes big trouble.
Right.
And that's just what it was.
Yeah.
So then I got called to go look at by Lockheed to help them with their F-35 proposal.
Ooh.
So I started on a bad idea, which was one airplane from the Air Force and Navy, which was a bad idea, to another bad idea at the end of my life, one airplane for 3 different services and a whole bunch of foreign guys, which is going to save money. And it doesn't.
No.
So I go down there along with another bunch of high-powered fire breathers, and we started looking at it, and the first development airplane was, good God, I forget, some astronomical amount of overweight. It was horrid. And that was unrecoverable. And let me tell you, heads rolled at Lockheed. I mean, rolled. Guys got called into the office one day and packing their decks that afternoon. And so our answer to that was, you got to basically start over. And you ought to keep the airplane you've got started. It was Air Force One, basically, as a development test bird. And use that to do things like flight control, handling qualities, things of that nature. And then start over with the other ones and keep it under control this time, because it can be done. And it was. And it was. And that was one of the really big foul ups in my lifetime, besides C-17. The rest of them were problems that needed fixing, and they got fixed. But the C-17 and the original start of the F-35 program were just not good.
Was it the VTOL part? Was that the part?
Nope. This was simply the Air Force airplane, the plain vanilla airplane.
Wow.
No carrier problems, no VTOL, no nothing.
Wow.
It was the Air Force airplane. There were problems with the VTOL gearing, the fan, and the whole 9 yards, but those are problems you expect.
Yeah.
But there was a pretty big massacre down at Fort Worth.
Well, what was your part in that? Just helping them with the program?
My part in that was with this committee to say, how did this happen?
Oh, okay. So you were
and what was the management failure that made it happen, and what the hell should we do about it?
Yeah.
Now, we didn't recommend anybody got their private parts removed or anything like that, but it was that they did that themselves.
Yeah.
And what we suggested was, you could have just junked the damn thing, or you could make it a useful toy. And it was a useful toy. And that you needed to start over again with a real close look at what you actually did that let it get this far out of control. And here are some things we think happened that let it get this out of control, and you need to fix.
Wow.
And it eventually got fixed. But anytime money gets involved, there are always people on the contractor side in the financial side, it will tell you, you make a common airplane, you will save money. A, there's no such thing as a common airplane. And B, it won't save any money because of that. And C, it'll take a lot longer because you got all these competing requirements.
Yep.
And so anytime anybody asks me, I says, is that a good idea? I said, no, absolutely not.
Yeah, no.
By the time you're all done, you could have had 3 separate airplanes for the same price.
Yeah.
And it would have been better for each of the services because there was no compromises involved. But I'm just some old fart been around a while.
They should have listened. They should have listened.
Who listens?
So what'd you do after that?
I'm just some guy out there, right, pitiful, just whining.
Yeah.
And that basically, after about that and a few other things I helped consult on, I just said, I'm done.
Did you ever get any
Yeah,
rides in any of the jets that you, I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Through your career?
None of the things I worked on, the only one I really got was F-14.
You got to ride a Tomcat?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you that story. The Air Force had started the ATF, and the Navy was looking to take, I think they called it the VFX, something like that. And it was a Tomcat replacement. And the powers that be at Fort Fumble said, you got to get in bed with the Pentagon. The powers that be up there said, you got to get in bed with the Air Force so that we can save money again by having 2 airplanes. One airplane for everybody.
Yeah.
And that wasn't going to happen. We didn't let it happen. So the Navy said, all right, we got to salute smartly. Sometimes the Navy salutes smartly. Sometimes the Navy sails off in their boats and says, hell with you. Which, and believe me, you know that.
Yeah.
So they sent a guy who was a Rio in the F-14, a guy named B.C. Holt, great guy. And he'd been a Tomcat Rio. And I went over to him one time and says, well, since you guys are getting in a boat with us, I've never been out on the carrier. Could you arrange for me to go out there and take a look and see what happens out there? He said, sure, you want to go out in a Tomcat? And I said, would I want to go out there in a Tomcat?
Hell yeah.
Well, yeah. So because the Navy hadn't set up a program office yet, DC was assigned to the SecNav's office as a special guy who was going to be the liaison for Navy involvement. So he sends sends off a thing to the SecNav's office, says, Mr. Abell, SES, blah, 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 needs to become familiar with carrier operations. Recommend he takes flights in an F-14, carrier operations, as well as air combat maneuvering and other things.
Holy crap.
I said, off we go.
I'm in.
So he sends this off to the SecNav's office, and the thing comes back, says, approved. Whoa. So he says, you got to go through water survival and a few other odds and ends. I said, okay, fine. That's good for me. So I go out to Miramar to the RAG, which is a replacement air group that does the transition training for Tomcats on the West Coast. And I met a guy named Jay Yakeley, who was a captain at the time, Navy captain. Wound up as a vice admiral, great guy. Called him Spook. So I have no idea why that was. Didn't want to bother me. So I got out to Miramar and they said, all right, you got to go through this training. And you got to go through helicopter training. So what do you mean?
Oh,
So you got to go through helicopter escape training in case you go down to drink on the way to the boat. I said, I'm not going to the boat on the helicopter. I'm going to F-14. Oh, okay. Got it. You don't have to do that. I said, well, thank you. So I said, do I have to go into Dilbert Dunker? And they said, probably not. Now we'll skip that, but you got to do the swimming and all that other good stuff. Well, at that time, I weighed about 230 pounds. I was about 6 foot tall. And they didn't have an LPU big enough for me at Miramar, believe it or not. And so they gave me this Mae West, which they said, you can't tie it down and you can't inflate it. I said, okay, fine. So I get in my gear, put the green bag on, the boots and the helmet and the whole 9 yards. And I jump off the deep end of the water. I start swimming. This damn Mae West keeps getting up in my face. And it starts to disorient me. So I sink like a friggin' rock. So I said, if you give me an LPU, I can probably handle this. I said, well, we don't have any. But tell you what, you don't pass, but you can go down to El Toro, to the Marine Air Corps Station, Marine Corps Air Station, and do it down there. I said, okay by me. We'll set that up. So I go back to Right Beautiful. A couple of weeks later, they called me up. Said, come on out to Miramar to El Toro and go through this stuff because they got big Marines, I guess. I don't know. So they suit me up with all this stuff. I jump in the pool and I swim like a fish and I make the laps and I do everything else. And they say, tread water, and I tread water, and then they do all this good stuff. And I pass all that kind of good stuff. He said, now we got some other stuff. You want to do that? And I said, what do you mean? So you can do the helicopter pickup. So what's that? I got this rotor blade. You've been through this. Thrashes the water and you hook up your harness and it pulls you out of the water. And I said, do I have to do that? And he said, you don't have to do that. I said, I ain't doing that. He said, all right, you want to do the parachute drag? I said, what's that? Well, you stand up on this 10-foot platform, face forward, and it yanks you off and pulls you through the water until you roll over and disconnect the coke fittings. I said, do I have to do that? He said, you don't have to do that. And I said, I ain't doing that. Said, all right, we'll sign you off. I said, okay, great. So then I go back up to Miramar and I do the ejection seat training and the chamber and the whole 9 yards. And Spook takes me out, and next day in a F-14, we go out there and do a lot of this and Whiffordills and 5G pass around the tower. And I'm saying, shit hot. Did an intercept on an F-4. I'm playing Rio, looking at the target and all that great stuff. Flying inverted, Mach 1, you name it.
Awesome.
And then we land, and he says, all right, tomorrow we'll go out to the boat. I said, Sierra Hotel. So I didn't puke, didn't use a bag, walked away, no problems. And part of what happened was when we first got in the bird, the spoilers were all out of whack. And I'm sitting in the back seat where all the circuit breakers are. He said, can you pop circuit breakers something or other? And I said, now, how about this? He said, all right, good. You're good to go. I said, all right, good. We're off we go. Then we do all that stuff. And I get back to the queue that night. Next day we wake up, go out to the bird, check out again. And off we go.
Hi there, by the way, it's 20:08.
What was that? Siri just woke up on my other iPad, sorry. So we launched, it was a 3-ship because there were 2 other guys going carrier qual that same flight. And we're just droning out to the boat. We aren't doing anything fancy, just figure out what's going on. And we go into a cloud bank and we pop out of the cloud bank and there's no more wingman. So I get on the horn and said, Spook, no wingman. I said, okay, if they don't find the boat, I guess they'll flunk. I said, okay by me. So we show up in Marshall, for coming back to the ship. And it was the Enterprise. Yeah, it was the Enterprise. And the number 2 arresting engine was broken. So there's no wire to number 2 station. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 going towards the bow. So the number 2 wire isn't there. The number 4 wire, or number 1 wire, let's see, 1, 2, 3. The number 3 wire is down because all the standoffs are beaten flat from all the CQ that was going on that day. So it's laying flat on the deck. Well, Spook had about, I think he said 2,000 hours in Tomcats.
Wow.
The reason being, he was one of the acceptance test pilots at Grumman for the Navy. So he flew every Tomcat that the Navy bought for a while. And he did all the checkouts in that. Then he went to the fleet in Tomcats. Then he went to the RAG commander in Tomcats. So he had buku hours. And so he was very, very good at carrier landings. So he lines up and he's got the ball and he calls the fuel and I'm watching the paw in the back. And he comes down and we hit 2 2 wire and it ain't there. And he gets a hook skip over the next wire, and then he misses the 4th one because it's laying flat. Off we go in the blue again.
Oh, wow.
You get a boulder. So this happens 5 times.
Holy crap.
He's so good. He's always hitting the place where he'll never get the hook. So he says, all right, that's enough of this. I said, well, I'm having fun. You can do this all day as far as I'm concerned. He says, I'll tell you what, I'm going to shoot for the sternmost wire. And you keep an eye on the airspeed in the back, because there is an actual airspeed indicator in the back. And if I'm below, I forget what the hell the approach speed is, 135, 140. Anyway, I'm watching the needle and he's coming down and bango, hit the wire, trap, taxi over. He says, you're supposed to get 2 cat shots. I said, goodbye me. So he says, keep your eyeball on the yellow shirt. And he's the guy that's plane captain that's directing you on the deck, and he tells you where you're going to fall off the edge or not. And so we taxi over to Cat, and he hooks up, and the Cat airplane kneels down. And the guy comes over to the side, to my right side, with a board. It's got numbers on it. I got a clue. And what it is to check the weight of what the Tomcat is, that cat shot, so that they can set the cat to the right number. And I had no clue. So I go to the guy at the board, goes,
It's his problem, not mine.
Spook, this guy wants to know what the weight is, I think. He says, yeah, gives him a thumbs up, and boom, off we go into the blue. And we make another run around, and bingo, he traps the board the first try this time. Park the plane, chain it down. I take a tour of the boat, go up see the captain, blah, blah, blah. Get a nice VIP hat, pass out patches to the guys and all that kind of good stuff. And then we go back in the airplane and dial up the Cat. And this time, guy shows me the board. I gave him a thumbs up because I knew what the hell the fuel state was and everything. And I figured we were so light, we were going to do it. And besides that, we were going to hit the light the burners on the TF-30, so I wasn't worried. So, boom, off we go, back on the way to Miramar. We're doing a little of the whifferdills and this and that and the other thing. Make another 5G pass in the tire, me and Maverick, and land. And that was my experience in combat airplanes.
Dude, that is awesome. That is a great story. Awesome.
I tell you, the greatest thing I've ever done, except getting married, having kids, is going out there to the boat and having fun in a Tomcat.
Tomcats, yeah.
All this other stuff I talked about for hours, that was a job. Fun job. That was a job.
But
this was fun.
You're still flying now, right?
Say again?
You still fly? You're a private pilot, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm a private pilot. Me and a partner own a plane, Air Coupe. I also own an ultralight that I doctored up like a World War I airplane. And I belong to a bunch of guys that fly replica World War I airplanes. We go out to the Air Force Museum every 2 years. They have a thing it's called, what is it? Dawn Patrol, where guys come out and fly their World War I airplanes around like it was World War I.
Awesome. Well,
I just fly for fun now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the only reason you should fly anyway. Yeah, that's the best. Best time to fly. But
it gets to be a job. Don't do it.
I have kept you way longer than I advertised. If you've got time, do you have a moment to take some questions from the crowd?
Sure, be my guest. If I can answer them, I will. If I won't, I won't.
Yeah, well, let's see if anybody's got any good questions from the crowd, or if you have any yet. I probably should have told them to start asking questions earlier, so I wouldn't be sitting here going, you know. But the problem is your stories are so good that I'm just sitting here riveted most of the time, going.
Yeah.
Gary says Tomcats.
Are you in sales?
I should be. No, I'm telling you, this is fascinating. I didn't know how fascinating that side of the world is. I will ask this question though. How does so you and I talked about it over email. How does somebody get into this? Is it just apply? Become an engineer? Like, what's your advice for somebody who wants to be you?
Well, there's 2 ways to do it. If you have an engineering degree, you can either join the Air Force or ROTC, or if you go to the academy, you can get an engineering degree. And you can be an engineer in the Air Force as an officer, or when the Air Force is hiring engineers, you just send in an application. And if you got the grades and you got the GPA and you're showing interest in it, they'll make you an offer usually.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's hiring freezes, sometimes there isn't. Like, you get surplus pilots, you don't need a big pilot class. Same thing happens with engineers. I know a lot of test pilots. Guys get an engineering degree, go to flight training, take an active duty tour, whatever airplane they're assigned, apply to test pilot school, go to become a test pilot, and that's the way to become a program manager for aircraft development. I would say that my guess is probably 90% of the Air Force program managers for aircraft development are rated officers, pilot officers who have been through test pilot school.
Wow.
Guys like me, you work your way up the ranks, and if you don't step on your tie, you get ahead.
Awesome. Well, first question comes from Maui Dave. What do you think of the Japanese resurrecting the YF-23 design as their proposed F-3? I told you that question would come up.
I would say more power to them. If that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. I would say that since the YF-23 design is now, how many years old?
At least 30.
30 or 40 years old?
Yeah, at least 30.
I would suspect that it would be better to use a clean sheet because you're going to have to do it all over again anyway.
Yeah.
Because if you tried to buy the equipment that YF-23 had, if you tried to use the materials it had, they aren't there. And you just had to start over again. So if it was me, I'd just start over again. It's a sexy looking airplane, I gotta give you that.
You think it looks better than the F-22? It's got that wide, like it looks like that flying squirrel kind of thing. I don't know.
I'll tell you a funny story about that.
Yeah.
The contractors didn't know what the other guy's airplane looked like. We released probably about a year and a half, 2 years into the program, what we call the artist concepts, where they weren't really exactly what they were doing. Well, the YF-23 picture got printed, and the head of the low observable department at Lockheed saw that, and this, I was told this, I didn't actually witness it. He grabbed this and went running down to the aerodynamicist at Lockheed and says, "You guys told me you couldn't do this." Because he wanted the same thing. And they wound up with the tails and the horizontals. So I tell you, it was Gary Irwin was his name. I was told he run down, and you told me you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And Northrop did it.
So Lion of Judea, on jump aircraft, why not remove the winglets?
Say again, you're echoing.
On the C-17, why not remove the winglets?
Because the range will go to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah, I guess that.
I mean, you take a look at all your commercial airliners. They got winglets.
We have like the scimitars now, where
up and down.
In your vast career, were there any engines or aircraft that you thought, how on earth did they get past design concept stage, let alone on the production line?
Not on production, but there were a couple that I thought should have been canceled and were canceled.
Yeah.
One of which was Republic's competition for the A-10. It was ugly.
Uglier than the A-10. I mean, it's beautiful now.
There was an A-9 and an A-10.
Oof.
And the A-9 was terminated. I won't go into why.
Okay.
But it deserved it.
Okay. All right. Obviously, they want to know it. How much have you interacted with the alien technology?
I've been to the places where they say there are aliens, and I can tell you without hesitation, there are none.
Oh, ruined it for us. God. Okay. See.
Now, how do you know that I'm not an alien? What can I say?
That's true. You have mastered the storytelling art, which is very alien-like. That's obviously not very human there. Um, what's your favorite aircraft of all time? Whether you worked on it or just in general.
I would say the Mosquito.
Mosquito.
Yep.
Why is that?
The sound of two Merlins cranking over, roaring through the sky at 400 knots, piston powered, all plywood airplane is just an amazing thing to me.
Yeah,
I just love that airplane.
that's a lot of testosterone. Um,
I call that the first composite airplane ever built
that's
because it's
awesome.
made out of plywood.
Well, I mean, technically.
Plywood's a composite, it's layers
Yeah.
of different stuff.
All right, two more questions. Do you
Sure.
keep up to date with the F-35? Matt here is in test at Edwards.
Not really. I touch on it occasionally, but I really put the airplane business back in the file drawer because I've done enough of it that I don't. There's nothing I can do about the F-35,
Yeah.
and the things that I would do about it are probably about 20 years out of date. So I just know that it took a long time to get the program on track, but now that it's on track, it's a great airplane.
Awesome.
It's just my personal opinion. It was a bad idea to try and make one airplane for three outfits. And I'll never change that because I've lived through enough of it.
And the final question is a historical question, which I like. Did you ever cross paths with John Boyd?
I crossed paths with John Boyd once when we were doing some of the original work on the ATF to get a better understanding of P-sub-S.
Really?
Because P-sub-S was one of the critical design parameters for the advanced tactical fighters. And I knew what it was, but I didn't have the fighter pilot understanding of how you employ it.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was around enough that we had a conversation. He probably doesn't remember me from Adam's House Cat, but it gave me a better appreciation of what it really meant. And that was very valuable in terms of the kind of trade-offs you have to have when you're doing airplane design, because everything can't be optimized. And being able to talk to the guys from fighter weapons school and from the aggressor squadrons and people like that who I had contact with was very valuable to make sure I understood how valuable or invaluable it would be in certain situations.
Wow.
I'm never going to be a fighter pilot. Got bad eyesight, but I never puked in a fighter.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Well, sir, it has been an absolute honor and a privilege to chat with you tonight. Just an awesome. And we got one comment. I think your management style is brilliant from Brian. So,
My what?
your management style is brilliant, is what.
I tell you, I'll go back to General Fain. He didn't suffer fools gladly, and neither did I. So we got along great.
But really, I mean, thank you for coming on the channel and telling all these stories and telling your story. I really appreciate it. I mean, this has been
No problem.
eye-opening.
I enjoy doing it.
When are you writing the book? Is there a book? Is there going to be a
I don't write
book?
books.
No,
There's going to be a book. Who the hell cares about what civilians do in the Air Force?
a lot of people.
I don't wear silk scarves.
All these people that just sat here and were riveted by your story. So thank you so much for coming on the channel. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Anything you want to tell the kids at home before we sign off?
I'll give them the same advice you give guys. Make them tell you no.
Yeah.
The ability to get things done in the Air Force, if you know what you're talking about, you have a good rationale for what you're doing, and it's against the rules, do it anyway. And then if they don't like it, they'll stop you. But if they see if it works, they ain't gonna bother you. I asked my boss once. He was kind of the chief engineer for all aircraft engines, airplanes for the Air Force, and he never bothered me. And he used to bother me a lot. And I said, Fred, why don't you bother me anymore? And he says, look, you got picked to do a good job. And the reason you got picked to do a big job is you know what the hell you're doing. So I don't need to bother you. I said, okay.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of mentality you keep telling people. Make them tell you no. If you really want to do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
There might be rules that says you can't, but if they're stupid rules, like the magic dust you put in because it was in the Korean War fuel tanks in the ditch, don't do that.
Yeah. That is awesome. Awesome.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for watching and being a part of this live stream. We'll break it up into clips later. Rick, a pleasure, honor. Thanks so much.
Oh, by the way, I had 2 call signs.
Go ahead.
Oh, you forgot to ask me, was I ever scared in an airplane?
Were you ever scared in an airplane? Sorry, I forgot to ask that question.
I had about 200 hours. I was flying a Cherokee. My wife was about 8 months pregnant.
Boy.
My eldest daughter was about 2 years old. We had gone from Dayton, Ohio to French Lick, Indiana for a $100 hamburger type of thing. We were coming back from French Lick, Indiana. I'm flying up the Ohio River. I wanted to show her Cincinnati from the air. I'm over downtown Cincinnati. The airplane starts shaking so bad I cannot read the instruments.
Uh-oh.
I pulled the power. My wife says, "What's the problem?" I said, "Nothing." I look out my window. I see Greater Cincinnati Airport off in the distance. I'm about 2,000 feet over downtown Cincinnati. I turn the airplane towards the airport. Every time I add power, the airplane shakes so bad I can hardly control it. So the propeller is turning by engine power, but not doing very much to keep the airplane in the air. So I get on the horn. I call up Cincinnati Tower. I said, I need to land. Guy says, you want to declare an emergency. Stupidly, I did not. I should have. I just told him, I said, don't let anybody get in front of me because I cannot go around. So I'm whistling over the trees on final approach to Greater Cincinnati. I'm high as I come over the end of the runway. It's a 10,000-foot runway. It's a Cherokee.
Mm-hmm.
I slip down, put it down in about the first 2,000 feet, taxi off the runway because there was enough power to get the airplane moving on the ground, taxi over to the fixed base operator, park the airplane. We all get out. Line boy comes up and says, would you mind moving that airplane about 6 slots down? I says, here's the keys. If you can get it running, you move it. I'm out of here. Called up my brother, said, Tom, get a case of beer, meet me at the fixed base operator, Greater Cincinnati, and we're going to have some drinks.
Holy crap.
It was a very exciting time.
What was it? What was
it? Had eaten the valve.
Holy crap.
The exhaust valve broke, went into the cylinder, bounced around a couple times, broke up, went out the exhaust, went out through the exhaust pipe, put a hole in the exhaust pipe. So I was running on 3 cylinders.
Wow.
And anytime I tried to get off of idle power, it was shaking so bad I was afraid it was going to fall out of the mouth.
Wow.
And so I always told guys that flying F-16s, I said, I've had more single engine failures than you guys, so don't give me that stuff.
Valid.
I had to tell you that one.
Valid. Well, sir, it's been a pleasure.
No problem, Dave.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Stay tuned. We appreciate you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Excuse me. Oh, no. Oh! About a lot of that.
perfectly fine with the doors off. All hot speed. Don't be a douche. That's rule number 1.
Make them tell you no.